Recording is on.
All right, so today's April 2, 2021, and we're going to continue our discussion on the Desiderata Extinctionati, part 3 with Kevin today. So let's start it off.
Very good.
So I wanted to broach something. So I did mention it last time, but I don't know if you want to go here. But I certainly do. So the whole thing, the God issue, right? God issue. And I want to hear, what you have to say about God and religion, and get into that stuff. Straight up. Yeah, I mean, I got to be upfront where I am. I mean, I consider myself a militant atheist. So, to me, so let me tell you what it looks like from my point of view, and then we can go from there. But I'm kind of fascinated because you obviously such an intelligent and well-informed guy, and then you obviously believe in God, and you drop these kind of God bombs in sometime. And to me, it looks like, how can such an intelligent guy actually believe in the tooth fairy? And so I want to go from there. But
well, I can sum it up in this: not everything is in our books, and not everything is in the publication records, and they're often wrong. And the simple fact is that there's the hard problem of consciousness, which is what people probably can best approach this conundrum with. And we don't have a very good idea about what that is. And so in that respect, do we see a sort of or is there a sort of panpsychism that permeates everything that we're part of, or is there an external deity, for want of a better description, that has our best interests at heart, that sits outside of whatever ruler that we could bring to measure it? The latter is harder to pin down philosophically for me, but some form of superordinate consciousness as operating across multiple scales there seems to be something approximating that when we look at the structure at the macro and the micro levels. And there's so where would a godlike consciousness emerge? At the scale of the solar system, at the scale of our brain, at the scale of the Milky Way? We don't really know. And in this particular instance, it's a case of there's a very obvious evolutionary advantage to religious thinking and embedding it in the culture. Now, does it have its shortcomings? Yes, because it can fall into dogmatic type thinking, but then so can science and any other philosophical doctrine that the human mind can come up with. But the simple fact of the matter is that we don't have good explanations for why we're self-aware to the degree that we are. There certainly doesn't, could be argued, need to be that degree of introspective component to our existence, right? And from a evolutionary perspective, you could just develop bigger, better, faster muscles and short-term memory, and that's going to see you compete at a better pace than the tribe around the corner. So the components of consciousness and then ethical choice seem to me to lead towards there being a moral direction in the universe. We tend to good, we tend towards creation, and we know what's down the other path, which is oblivion. And it's always the metaphysical battle to have to make sure that you're making the right choice. And I think that there's a it would be very hubristic to think that any one person can know all things that are needed to make those choices and decisions. That's why we work as collectives. Somewhat, we're social animals. And as much as you need the warrior, you need the scribe, you need the poet, you need the spiritual aspect as well. And there's a neuroscience of consciousness and spirituality which we're beginning to wrestle with. A lot of this is sort of coming from the psychedelic research, and there's something there that we're beginning to grapple with better than just the cultural guides which were written down and passed along as sort of religious type schools. And yeah, that would be my opening statement.
But so is your God like a Christian God, or where does the Abrahamic God fit in? Because you're talking about panpsychism and it's more pagan belief and it's more New Age. But where does someone like the Christian and Abrahamic monotheism?
So I can take the idea of a singular consciousness from the Abrahamic faith as there being only one consciousness, I guess, rather than try and just substitute consciousness in where they mention the word God. And sometimes I find that easier way to navigate the how would you say the argumentations for proofs. Right. So if you want to, there's the old adage, you can't disprove a negative, and so you can't disprove the existence of God. Okay, well, that's not really a very useful statement. Let's say, can we disprove the existence of consciousness? Well, that brings it down to a much more tractable problem for us, right? I can, even through a screen, you seem conscious, right?
It's deceptive. Don't believe
it. But well, I mean, if it's that good, then the sort of simulation arguments kick in, and I find those intellectually weak premises to be trying to hitch my wagon to. Because then the idea of it just being something on what we approximate computing and chips, even though, look, the fundamentals of any science just talks about information flow and processing, right? And the transformation of information into one form or another.
Like Wheeler's it for bit, right?
Yes, and so are we hang on, it says my microphone is noisy, so I check which one I'm using. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, but you've changed now. You've gone into an echo chamber.
Is that better?
Yeah, that's much better.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, hang on. I don't know if people can hear you. Wait 1 second. I need to check my. Can you give me a sound check?
Testing. 1, 2, 3.
Right. And then let me just see if it looks. No doubt my comment section is shouting at me right now.
It's a sign. It's a sign. It's the simulation. They change it on you the minute you start going deep,
Yeah. Yeah, it seems okay. So people can just tell me if they can in the chat, please, if it's okay.
I just wanted to insert something there. So, yeah, the thing about the monotheistic God and the singularity of consciousness. So I agree that one of the signature traits of consciousness is that it's singular. Nobody really seems to have a bifurcated consciousness, even though we have two brain hemispheres, which is kind of mystery that Descartes wondered about. Descartes put our consciousness in the pineal gland because that was the only part of the brain that wasn't actually split. And so, but there isn't. It's not. I don't believe it's quite as monotheistic as people think in the Bible. What not a lot of people know, especially Christians, is that if you look in Genesis, it actually says it refers to God as Elohim, which is actually plural. And the reason for it is because basically they're talking about Mesopotamian gods. There are actually three gods. There's basically Yahweh, and he had two brothers. His father is Enlil, which I always like asking Christians, born again Christians that try to convert you, say do you know who Yahweh's father is? And that normally blows them away. But it's a guy called Elohim. It's basically Sumerian god. They got this all from the Sumerians, and if you go back in history, it kind of is kind of illuminating. But there was basically this. Yahweh had a brother called Hadad and Yam, and Hadad is a Baal. So the reason why there's all this, Baal gets a bad rap in Exodus and the Old Testament is because that was a competitive faction of these three gods. Yahweh won out, of course, and so now we say, oh, there's only one God. But there was a lot of killing off of Yam and Baal to get to that one God. And it still remains in Genesis that when they talk about the creation, then it's not one God, it's Elohim. And the reason is because it was three gods back then. And I think I don't like the Christian narrative, and I think it's kind of, if there is a God, it's kind of like it's designed almost to make people deviant. It basically mislead them and lead them down the wrong path, almost intentionally, in fact.
Well, there's where do you sort of draw a cutoff, right? So the likelihood of you being here at this time right now, if there hadn't been a structuring through religion in the past, you could make the argument that there wouldn't be a Hugh sitting here and having this conversation. And the history of the deities and all that, to me, it's if you're into that, I understand why people are, and all the history. It's good to know where archetypes come from and track them back as far as we can through time. But it's the simple equation is that our written records don't match the fossil records. The modern hominid has been here for hundreds of thousands of years, and we've got a slither of that with respect to our history. And you've got to just look how deranged people are right now, okay, and then ask them to go through a let's put it in the context of a civilizational type collapse event. And I wouldn't I don't like the extinction level event, because that there's enough evidence just to say that we've been through these cycles so many times that it's tough to wipe out life. And in those circumstances, if you're left with well, who would you be left with? Probably more primitive type peoples who could survive the few weeks without access to the internet and the supermarkets, and eventually that would get whittled away. The the scenarios for end of the world preparations they're not new, right? They've been going on since forever. They still do. It's just we've given them a technological coat of paint, and in the last few hundred years, and that's accelerating. Now, does that mean through rationalism and reductionism dispense with the sacred and the metaphysical?
Just the
can I just interrupt a second there? I think we're all talking about we're all talking about the word sacred from the beginning, and but this has nothing to do with religion. Sacred. You know what I mean? We are talking about two different things there.
Yeah, that's what I was going to raise next. Yeah.
Is it though? I mean, ask someone who believes in Jesus Christ as the savior of mankind whether their relationship to Jesus is a sacred one or not.
Well, with the panpsychism, what you're promoting there is Gnosticism. And Gnosticism is
I'm not promoting one or the other. This is yeah. Let's get this straight. Okay, so I don't know. Okay, I don't know either or. Either could make sense to me. Okay, now I await the great reveal when I draw my last breath and the death trip starts. But it's arrogant to look. I've been there. You know, I've been hooked by the science machine. The like I say, the Descartes and reductionism and all that type of good stuff. And look, it's important. It's important for rigor. Right? You have to have rigor in any thought process. Okay, and you must at certain times dispense with extraneous information if it's getting in the way. Now, if we're in a situation where church dogma has become an impediment rather than a vessel through which generations can be carried, and these are, don't underestimate the importance of these cultural identities, and don't underestimate the perniciousness of ideologies that would try to wipe them out. Okay, and that's and you know, that's where it's very easy then for me to sort of shuttle up and down the different scales, as it were, and then just say, well, okay, at some scale it becomes a argument about good and evil. Well, what does that really mean? You know, speak to someone in Asia, they have different ideas of what evil means if you've come from a more Abrahamic background. But there's still a understanding for me, and let's say I've been in the Middle East, now in the East, and I can see that there's threads that are common. And okay, so we could look at hominid type species and say, well, where did that really start? And then we can go back to sort of Paleolithic times and say, well, we can see fossil records of them engaging in sort of symbolic type acts, especially at burial, right? And you know, that's the metric that they use to say something changed, right? An animal will try to nudge its young or its partner if it dies, but they soon quickly forget, whereas we somehow developed the trait that to maintain the memory is a good thing. And you know, I don't know, there's maybe an argument that you know, the deity, God, whatever, it is evolving at the same time in that context. And I'm reluctant to disparage you know, the metaphysical when, you know, I've seen an assault by the very same groups that are you know, pushing sort of to me they're anti-life paradigms, and in this, you know, communism, communitarianism, whatever ism it is, it's control of one aspect of your life or another, and that's it's against our nature to be doing that, and so, you know, look, who tried to remove, who had a systematic removal of religion from society? Communism, right? There was some that would argue right now that you're dealing essentially with just communism 2.0, and they're trying to remove the idea of faith and the idea of something bigger than yourself, which you should be leaning into. Okay, they want you to be floating down a lazy river of nihilism, and because then it's easier to control you, right?
But it started before the communists. I mean, it's part of empiricism. So you know, since Bacon and the Baconian Revolution, since the Enlightenment, that is an Enlightenment ideal, to be entirely rational and to get rid of belief. But it's not cut and dried, because, you know, what they're trying to get rid of is almost the same as what you're saying. It's I would say that it's right to. I'm very anti-religion, and the reason is because it's trying to put an intercessor between you and your metaphysical God. So basically, the church and the Pope and that says, like, you know, we're the hotline to God. I tend towards the Gnostic idea that, you know, if there's a God, it's us and our consciousness, like you seem to say. And then they're saying the exact opposite. They're saying, no, God's not you. That's a heresy, and burn Giordano Bruno at the stake, and the Gnostics and the you know, Albigensians and everybody get burnt at the stake for saying exactly, you know, that consciousness is God, and it's you are the same as God. And then they're saying, no, it's outside, and it's a control narrative. So the Pope and Christianity and the idea of saying, you know, if you say the word Jehovah, you get stoned and stuff. It's by saying there's this big man in the sky. Now, rationalists said, you know, we must get rid of that idea. It's just a control narrative. And they were right. Eventually it becomes communism, and then, you know, they've come full circle where they now want to be totalitarian to get rid of your totalitarian instincts. So it's completely looped round back on itself. But I think that Christianity is pure evil because it's trying to make you believe in this tooth fairy in the sky. Though, well, you know, from the level of kids, I think it's child abuse to tell kids that, you know, Santa Claus is real, the tooth fairy is real, and there's this guy in the sky watching you, and when you die,
you poor
sit
kids,
at a table with him, you know.
You poor kids. Why, you know, that's
well, that's traumatizing. To tell the kids they're going to sit for eternity at the table of this traumatizing rampant through the Old Testament. It's like it's awful.
There were no Christmas presents in your house. There was.
Well, yeah, but we never. I can't remember a time when you know, I was the youngest in the family. I can't remember a time where I believed in Santa Claus, because with older kids, they just wouldn't let you believe in that. So I knew that Santa Claus was my parents from, I can't remember a time when I didn't believe that.
Relatively young, but there's a very what we're supposed to indulge our children in the you know, the birds and the bees from the moment they're sort of talking, and you know, there's a point for having a childhood, and a childhood filled with imagination, and that's part of the psychic development of a human being that enables them to think beyond themselves, Okay, so if to be having this level of conversation, you have to go through various steps of maturation to be able to say, well, okay, I can look at the story of the, I don't know, let's think of something.
Noah's flood. Noah's flood.
Noah's flood, for example. Okay, that's a good one. Because everything that I see would indicate across cultures that something did happen.
Agreed.
On a global scale, that said, here was something that essentially at that scale, it's godlike anyway. You there, but for the grace of God go I. Okay, and the fact that we don't get whacked by meteors and we don't get drenched in solar flares every week is a miracle in and of itself. And when you start adding up everything, it's just simple odds calculations. We don't have good ways of rejecting the bigger picture, and any reductive system is always going to fall short of, it has a boundary condition to it that impedes your ability to extrapolate beyond it. And I'll give you a good example from sort of biology and what we see right now, and that is you can take let's do something. So just SARS-CoV-2, for example, but something that everyone can think about. Okay, that we can look at that and then we can say, well, okay, we can go down to that scale, and we're at the interface almost where the theoretical reductionism tells us that there are all these types of spooky type effects that can occur. So instant communication without lag, as defined by relativistic physics, all that type of stuff is something which reductionism tells us is there. It's baked into the mathematics and the theorems. But at a technological level, we're unable to sort of probe it beyond the hard physics, if you like. So, you know, we take pure forms of energy, laser light, or whatever, the ions that we smash together in the Large Hadron Collider. And then from there, we say, okay, this matches the theoretical predictions that we have with respect to the Stockholm Declaration, was it? And where they were basically
models,
yeah, and the premise that there's a hard cutoff for all this spooky vibrational type physics, and then the emergent biology is it's a facile one. It doesn't have an intellectual stopgap, if you like, or the inverse of a stopgap, because they're trying to say that there is a stopgap, and before that they would argue that, oh, there's a thermal issues take hold at the macro scale, so that you can't have a quantum biology. Whereas what we're discovering is that we can find more and more processes that seem to have quantum-like nature in biology. As we've gone round, we've had to go through the empirical roller coaster ride to get back round to saying, well, there's something hidden with respect to reality. So there are dimensions that exist outside of what we can perceive. They're obviously communicating across a higher dimensional space, and what we're seeing is in some ways emergent from those axes that are outside of our immediate purview. And you know, what most people are sort of have some notion of the idea of counter space, right, that exists orthogonal to the direction of a vector of an electron, for example. This is what Nikola Tesla is talking about all the time, and that there's a a back and forth between Cartesian space and counter space that pulls and draws energy and makes it achieve higher order purpose, right? So a classic example being the second law of thermodynamics, which means that everything's going down to some sort of heat death and sort of randomness, where I would put forward the premise that actually what we seem to keep seeing is a tendency to ever more complexity and depth with the, so it's I don't think that cycle, it's not the right word, it's a
but not it's not teleology that you're talking about. It's more mathematics. It's computational, right?
well, the which part? So that the part that there's
when things emerge, they emerge according to rules algorithmically. So it emerges in kind of thing like Euclidean geometry that you can expand from as soon as it has some basic manifestation. So as things scale up from the quantum scale, they seem to scale up according to some rules, like Maupertuis's principle of least action and some kind of conservation laws in physics. Nota's symmetries and things like that. So as soon as you get into the land of the macroscopic and stuff that's kind of relevant to chimps like us, it seems to have rules based that are not that are more fundamental than thermodynamics. Thermodynamics is kind of an emergent feature, and like you, I don't hold much sway in the second law of thermodynamics. I think it's a mistake, but it is considered one of the fundamental laws of physics. But
but when you're making an artificial closed system, their observations are correct, right? But we're not, like the Earth isn't a closed
not
system.
even the approximations. But it's clear what happened. There's Boltzmann missed the attractor. He was just thinking in terms of dispersion because he was one of the first that had an atomic model. But he missed the fact that there's things like gravitation and electrostatic attraction. So if you have a dispersive model, you get to heat death. But people in his time said to him, look, you're missing something because the Earth has obviously become more complex and it's gone uphill in terms of entropy. And so it would be impossible. And he was so depressed by the whole thing. He got so nihilistic, he committed suicide. He couldn't bear the idea of his own theory of the second law of thermodynamics and the nihilism involved in it. But I think his peers that tried to tell him that he was wrong were correct. And the reason why is it's not all just dispersion; it's attraction too.
So there's a bunch of papers written in the 30s and 40s that people miss because of the well, I guess the war played a big factor in the fact that science got militarized, and so there were official secrets that were basically kept. But unless people are familiar with Lancelot Law White, the unitary principles of physics and biology, and all their work, all that work, the conversation is going to always go down the path of the reductionist physicist worldview, because that's the let's say the standard model. But the reductionist view doesn't explain very well the biology. But I can tell you it's a very Western way of looking at the world. It's not so embedded in the East, right? There's a more well, it comes down to an acceptance of ambiguity when looking at complex systems, and that we can't ever. It's very, very difficult, given our current technologies to be able to say that we can see everything and then go down to the finest detail and then just bootstrap it back up, because there's elements that we still don't miss, the elements that we miss, and how do you you have to give them a framework, and that framework is one of, I would say, you learn from other disciplines. If you just gonna doggedly stick to the second law of thermodynamics, then you've fallen into scientism, not science. And there's a spectrum of laws and rules that we can imply and extract, but they're our understanding, I would guess. So someone's just writing at me, inevitabilitas multiplicus, meaning that complexity is superficial on an ontological level. An expression, classic physics. In modern physics, it means they only find quarks with weird abilities when they look further. Yeah, this is the issue with inherent reductionism in as a worldview. It's powerful. We know it's powerful because look around you. There's not anything that hasn't been augmented by the principles of reductionism, right? The screen that you're looking at, the books behind you, are all a consequence of being able to break down systems, understand them, and then augment them in our favor. But if we do that more and more, eventually there becomes a point where are we just androids or autonomous at one level? I think that's in a reductionist sense, I can see the argument for it, because you're ruled by rhythms. Your own biology has rhythms that it has to maintain in order to be as optimal as possible, right? So, and that means optimum as many number of times across as many number of days as is naturally beneficial to the system. And in the human context, that means the propagation across generations. And there's a sort of rule of thumb that sort of 3 generations is the key to stability across a household. That you need grandparents, parents, and children together as a unit in order for there to be a coherence across time. Because look, you get into very, very complex discussions about what even is time, right? Why is there time? Why does the universe seem to unfurl a bit like a movie to us, when the mathematics would sort of argue, well, is it really necessary when there's this higher order information exchange at this fundamental level, which our physics sort of points to? And it's not just maths, it's quantitative measurements that have been done. And I think that as good as the reductionist process has been, it has a tendency to fall in love with itself. And in falling in love with itself,
narcissistic. Yes, narcissistic.
And then where do we go from there? Well, the technocracy emerges. You see the people climbing to the top because of faulty or existentially poor argumentation that would come from people like Ayn Rand and selfishness as being a virtue. And I've never, ever been able to buy that argument, right? Because animals are inherently, well, no, that's not true, because there's hierarchies within animal actions where, if it's a pack of wolves, the alpha male will get the best bits of meat and the best mating rights, etc. But it's traded off with the alpha male is as good as his group, right? And so we see a back and forth exchange. Now, is there a reductive analysis of that beyond, well, we can observe the hierarchy, but do we really understand what that means? We talked earlier about having an ordinate set outside of what we're able to perceive. So what's a wolf pack in that context? Or do you just think in terms of biology? Well, okay, they kind of clear the weak of the herd, the herd of the weak, sorry, right?
Yeah, they're sweeping up entropy in the herd, yeah.
And these are these are things that we've removed right now through our technological prowess. And it wasn't that long ago that you had to worry about wolves. And it's why, look, the stories, Little Red Riding Hood, that's an archetype that goes back deep into our genetic memories, right? We know not to go where there are wolves out there, okay? Because you'll get taken out. They'll hunt you down and they'll take you out. And so we develop these stories, I guess, rhymes that are there to teach and encourage. You've got to always lean into the moment, as it were. And I don't mean that in the cliched now, but I mean that's how fast things are moving. But the Jordan Peterson clean your room type argument, because most people still can't make the jump from clean your room to, oh, a lot of our programming or evolution has been driven by these factors shaping how we interact with our environment. And you don't have to go back far. Even just 100 or so years ago, there were wolf packs across most of Europe, okay? And it's not until we got really accurate firearms that we could take them out at a distance that we got them under control. And when we could get them under control, we nearly made them go extinct. That's how much we feared those types of animals. And
But do you think it was a good thing or a bad thing? Because I don't think it was a good thing that we got the wolves under control. I think that was a mistake for us and the wolf.
Depend, because it's like trying to make a calculation with ever evolving variables and saying, haha, we know the system, and therefore this is the path that we should take. Now, I can imagine if wolves are applying such a pressure onto humans, right? So let's just take for example the selfishness component to the Ayn Rand approach, that selfishness is a virtue, that we could there would be people who because they've managed to get a bit of control of the environment, and they fought the wolf pack somehow they lucked out and killed a wolf pack that was eating or something with and then they become a tyrant because they've killed the wolf pack, okay? And they can then say, okay, right, they kind of understand the nature of wolves, etc. It's of benefit to do that because more people come. But yes, it's
we domesticated them. We domesticated them, and then we used them in hunting. So we took one of our predators, and we did it with the cat too. We were, for most of our existence, we've been cat food on an African plain, and we actually, our prime predator. There's so much in our psyche to do with cats, and even our visual apparatus and stuff.
Well, I would intervene there to say, going back for the example of cats, and after what Kevin is saying there about when we started to experience the need to put wolves under control. I was studying the wild tiger of the highlands, which is an old wild cat that's completely untamable. There's only about 50 left in Scotland. And the biologists have studied their reproduction in compared to the ferals and the domestic cats that have been sometimes interbred with them. Now, the wild cat only has 1 litter a year, because he knows, it's in his it's in his genetic making that his territory would not be able to have all the litters that the other cats have. So the humans at some stage also have certainly, I don't know, it's a question, I've suddenly started to lose it in terms of territory and what is sustainable for them. And I think a lot of this is causing this, what we call about the wolves, for example, the massacres of wolves, keeping them under control. If the humans knew that their territory was limited, like some of the primitive tribes who actually, it's very interesting to study the amount of children they have, the way their families are structured, and the way they divide their land. Well, their land, it's wild. I think there's a thing there. Maybe I don't put it very right. I hope you grasp what I mean. But the fact that we have a limited, as a tribe, amount of trees and fruit trees to gather berries from and animals to hunt means that we have to somehow understand that we can't breed exponentially. And that I was studying this with the cats, but the domesticated cats now are completely, it's just a crazy thing. Like, there's neutering everywhere, there's there. So yeah. What do you think?
Okay, so maybe I can interpret what you're saying this way. So we were just talking to Leah Keith about exactly this, about reintroducing wolves back into Yosemite. Now, they eliminated all the wolves from Yosemite. It was a disaster for the ecology from every species known to man. It didn't work from the point of view of the elk and the deer. The deer are supposed to have a predator and keep on moving so that they don't, overshoot the what the plant mass will support. And so, without the wolves to keep the deer moving and the moose, elk, they would just overgraze in one position, basically, because there's no point in moving. It's the laziest option, is to stay in place and just eat the crap out of whatever there is. So they had to reintroduce the wolf to reestablish the ecosystem. But now, if you imagine that you are a moose, you wouldn't want the wolf reintroduced. And you would have to be a super intelligent moose to say, yeah, the wolf is my worst nightmare, but we need it. And I think humans are in the same position. It's the same position with this narrative of fighting viruses and things like that. Is like, I'm deeply suspicious that viruses and things like that are not necessary. Not just from a eugenics standpoint or kind of thing, but I think that they are really important in evolution, and we're getting to the stage where we're degenerating like a moose that has lost its predators, but we can't see the wisdom. We're not smart enough. We're like a moose that's saying, like, no way, over my dead body will I introduce a wolf, but into my Yellowstone Park. But we have to get to the stage where we've got to stop this narrative of control of everything, because it's that control itself is turning into our own destruction.
Well, so it's good to put it in the context of viruses. So there was, you want a churn of endemic illness, if you like, because it culls the herd, right? We know that, and there's an acceptance of that in our culture. We know, and you can see that in the flu numbers. And I know people are going to say, SARS-CoV-2 is just the flu. I'm sorry, we have to pull on some data, and there are sentinel systems in place that look for influenza, and we can see that by going through shutdowns that you can stop the spread of influenza, right? And we're down to like a few thousand cases across the European continent, and I trust European data in that respect. Okay, and indirect measures like antibiotic use have plummeted. Okay, because of the failure of these pathogens to
and sexually
get a grip.
diseases. 40% drop in my country.
So
Yeah,
it
but
tells you that we can.
we won't take that as an indictment of your country.
It's we're playing this balancing game anyway all the time. Okay, we have that deal with nature, as it were, and this is why people have been so pushed towards the idea that the the lockdown is sort of anti-human, as it were, and under any other circumstance, I would agree with those people. Okay, that type of tactic. It's only because we have to put the current status in terms of a artificial pathogen that I'm in any favor of looking at mechanisms to reduce its impact on human populations. And how would you? Don't think of a good analogy to sort of encapsulate the direction of thinking. I would just
go ahead.
I'm sorry, say that I missed something.
No, I was going to just introduce something that might help. So in terms of just an umbrella authoritarian control of something like a pandemic, if you people like it in terms of safety and a lockdown, and they have this, well, at least we have somebody protecting us. But I tend to think of the opposite. If I imagine, hey, if there was no authoritarian, if we had no umbrella institutions and governments to have this, what I feel is completely fake narrative of control, then think how it would have come down. We're just talking about these folklore and things about fear of the wolf and things like that. Now, there's this huge suppression, largely to stop panic. And you're saying, no, panic is what you want. If there were no authoritarians, like say, for example, where I am here in Greece, I was on an island where there was no cases, but people were fined $3,000 because 3,000 euros because they, they opened up their bars and stuff because it was getting ridiculous. People say, like, there isn't a single case that we cut off from everybody. Why the fuck do we have to be in lockdown? And so people started to go, get around it, and it became a bit of a farce. Now, that is quite legitimate human behavior. What would have happened, I think, if we were not controlled by Athens, is that each one of the islands would have, the safe ones would have found, hey, are you safe? Oh, okay, so we can establish communications. There would have been a natural green zone. If anybody got a case, people would have been terrified, and that island would have been cut off. They would have done their natural isolation. But it was completely fucked up because there was this Greece-wide control from Athens. And you say, no, that was a disaster from every point of view. So there's been untold and artificial suffering. There's been unnecessary lockdown. There's been, when there should have been a lockdown, people should have been terrified and not flown and not. People did fly because they think, well, the government wouldn't let us fly if it wasn't safe. And it's like, no, that's not true. The government wants the economy to run. So you have this artificial layer over the top of these natural systems and stuff that we developed conspiracy theories and things because those are really, if they turn out to be false negatives, that's okay. If a false positive, that's okay. A false negative is a disaster for our species. But what they're doing now with this censorship and this clampdown on information is really they're stopping us from seeing things that are, false negatives. And a false negative is a disaster. If there's a tiger coming for you out of the thing and you say, no, don't be a conspiracy theorist, there's no tiger there. And you get that wrong once and you're out of the gene pool. So it's kind of like the stuff that you've been doing is you're saying, if you look at the upside, of damping down on conspiracy theories, you say, what's the upside? Well, people get the economy going again and we start pumping out greenhouse gases. Look at the downside. if anything you're saying, in which could get you cancelled as a conspiracy theorist, if you're right on any one of those, the disaster is, the downside risk is huge. So they're not saying that. You know, that they're saying like, well, we got to stop people panicking and we got to keep control. And I'm saying like, no, you much rather let conspiracy theorists run wild. It is a natural defense that we've evolved, and it just runs counter to what the establishment in these big cities wants.
Yeah, and again, I would. It's only because of the likes of cranks that were coming out at the beginning, pushing the idea that there's no such thing as infectious viruses, this type of thing, that I've taken a lot of the positions that I've done publicly over the last year or so, because I'm from hands-on experience. I know that they're just talking nonsense, right? We handle these things in a lab all the time, and I know that lab pathogens can get there's a potential for them to get out of control, and the even like the it's not good. People are going to struggle to think about that, but the labs that use rabies as for neural tracing, etc., you can find contamination pretty much everywhere that you look when you go into these laboratories. But it's done. The research is done in the context of you're prophylactically taking a well-established vaccine all the time. I've had many rabies shots purely because I'm around the environment in which a pathogen like that could get out of hand. The issue that we're dealing with right now is us Joe Public types don't know the machinations going on behind the scenes, and everything that we're seeing right now, to me, just looks like it's almost like a simulation run wild, right? A war game simulation run wild, where they've used it's a live ammo exercise. And that's, I think, a lot of what we're dealing with. And this is where I think it ties into a lot of the geopolitical posturing that's going on in the background, which is the shift for the fourth industrial revolution is about the breakup of the hegemony of the United States and building the Belt and Road Initiative and the Pan-Eurasian superstate. And again, this isn't my work. All credit for this goes to Brendan O'Connell. And look, we had it shoved in our faces this week. China and Iran signed 25-year deal for infrastructure building. That's the heart of the Belt and Road Initiative. These don't seem like programs, green conscientious programs. These are massive infrastructure designed to transport goods and services across the globe in record time, so that profits can accrue at record time. And how much it was an accident, I don't know, but the evergreen blockage of the Suez Canal is almost like it was there to remind you of just how fragile the world systems are. So we need to make them more robust. And that's exactly what you're seeing being played out right now. And embedded in that program is this idea of human management, right? And the way that they're already telling you, expect more pandemics because of global warming, expect the weather to get more crazy because our industrial practices are so noxious to the planet. And everything seems to be, from whatever direction you come at it, geared towards this event horizon. And we can see the pieces lining up, right? And imagine you're watching. So you're a prisoner going for electric chair, right? And you're sitting there and you don't believe in electricity. You think it's all a myth, right? And everything that they've shown you with respect to capacitors and whatever makes up the electrical infrastructure, you don't believe that things can work that fast, etc. And even right up to when they've got you clamped into the chair, they're throwing the switch, whatever, you don't believe it because it's all so slow and you don't care. But you've watched everything get put into place, right? And there's a denial of reality because there's you put a cognitive block in the way of trying to understand what it is that's going on. And it's not until the electricity actually flows that reality then takes a hold of your biology. And I imagine the phase transition to be very rapid and quick. And
this is not far-fetched. I know a very, very famous case of exactly what you said here, and it's basically Jesus on the cross. That's exactly what happened to him. No?
Yeah. Very good point. And with and so this
what I mean by that is Jesus didn't think he was delusional. He didn't think he was going to die on the cross because he thought he was a god. But he was like a guy who didn't believe in electricity, and I'm pretty sure that on the cross he found out that he was mortal.
Well, that's the whole point of that story, right? Is that Jesus, as the Son of Man, did find out he was mortal. He had to face his death. He had to face all these struggles, be it the temptation of Christ and being whisked away by Satan and being offered everything on this earthly realm, or the cognitive jump to make that you can make a bargain, right? This is Jordan Peterson's stick again, that you make a bargain with the future, right? That your behavior right now will lead to more bounty even if you go through hardship at this current time, right? And that's what we see all the time. People have faith that something is going to get better. And my overall concern at the moment is that it's a deluded form of thinking right now. If people don't understand the scope of what they're dealing with, where they think this is just a regular flu, or it's nothing too serious to worry about, I would say we would be unwise to think in those terms. You've got to game theory out what it is that you're dealing with. Biowarfare programs are written all over the whole infrastructure that makes up the SARS-CoV-2 storyline, and it goes back generations and generations. So look, I did a stream, I don't know if you watched it, where we were watching Obama's national security officer, etc., and he'd been on I think it was Hoover Institute, one of those think tanks, and he was he kept quiet, but we found a podcast of his where the title was that next generation biotechnologies were going to ameliorate or negate the zero-sum game of biowarfare development. And it was enthusing about it's all vaccine technology, and it's all one health, one planet, one health, and the vaccines and the gene therapy technologies to overcome these limitations that we're setting ourselves. And this once you see that it's come from these programs that were a consequence of warfare, again, I encourage everyone go to watch Housatonic Live and his deep dives and see how it's all covered by the Atomic Commission, particularly in the United States. But every country has their state national secrets, where the scientific process got warped at a very fundamental level, where it was no longer about the sort of open sharing of data, because elements could get weaponized, and everything now seems to get put through that filter of weaponization, even down to information. Which is why you're seeing the terrible censorship being unfurled right now. Why you're seeing the push for, if they were really interested in our health, why aren't they dishing out advice with respect to getting healthy? Why not give everyone a break to unwind and decouple and all these types of things? But no, it's about vaccines and ever more acceleration and pushing the system. And this is why I can't buy into any of the ecological arguments that as soon as it comes under this One Health umbrella, I'm like, okay, I can see the game that's being played here. And well, it's not a game, is it? It's, well, no.
Okay, can I interject here and so make a kind of proposal? So it's annoying for me because I agree with everything you say, and it's annoying me that I can't find significant points of disagreement. But okay, so let me try this then. What do you say to the proposal that all these kind of initiatives, and there's so many of them, like, you know, if you're the Rockefeller Foundation, all these foundations, if you take communism, what do you take to the proposal that it's really the emergence of a meta self? So what I mean by that is, if you, like me, you came from software, and software programmers generally have read a book by Douglas Hofstadter, who's kind of like an AI apostate, an early AI apostate, called Gödel, Escher, Bach. And Gödel, Escher, Bach is kind of, I don't know if you heard of that, but it's kind of like a Bible for programmers. And really,
yeah,
what
the eternal golden thread, and it's a great book.
Yeah, the Eternal Golden Braid. Did you read it?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, well, there you go. So, okay, well, then we're way streets ahead. Sorry for everybody else if we just geek off here a little bit. But what Douglas Hofstadter is saying is, if you take something like an anthill is really eusocial. If you see E.O. Wilson's kind of research into insects and eusociality, humans are, if we're not eusocial yet, we're on the brink of eusociality. Just in terms of what you were saying at the beginning of this conversation, that there are various types. You need the poet and the warrior and all of these types. That is eusocial. It means that essentially you won't like this, but essentially maybe you even need gay people because like drones and a hive, they're non-reproductive, but they support some kind of role for the group selection of the hive. But anyway, let's not get into
I'll add this, right? We know that there's a constant of homosexuality within populations, but it doesn't matter what population it is, right? And it'll vary somewhat. My objection is the distortion of it that's being used to drive agendas right now. This is what I object to. Okay. And it's not in, I'm not at the point where I want to throw them off buildings, but it's getting close when I'm seeing the level of subversion that's being done in their name. And you know, I know gay people who are just as upset about that as you know, the most ardent conservative. Okay, it's not a binary of my argumentation to say kill them all. Right? Islam is right about gays, like Islam is right about women. You know, you can't achieve ideological purity. We've learned that through history, and we're at a point where we can spread information widely enough to say, well, you know, these are warnings that we should heed. And you know, if you let degeneracy take over, you leave yourself open for being subverted, for and having and being farmed in a way. And I think that's what we're seeing right now. And this then comes back to the existential issues of the faith, right? To sort of tie it back the conversation at the beginning, that each of the faiths has a eschatology that they're all linked to each other when you look at it sort of from top down, and we are, or you would be unwise to I'm sorry, I've got it's work beeping at me that I'm getting distracted right now. I said I would do something and I haven't done it.
Well, we can ring off shortly, but let me finish my where I was going with the proposition here. So what I propose is that is it possible that if you take the superorganism, really an beehive or an ant colony becoming eusocial is the casts and things like that in terms of drones and warrior ants and things like that. They are becoming like organisms in a superorganism, and so a beehive would be a superorganism. All the members of that they kind of lose their individual identity. So if you take it all the way back to what you're saying at the beginning, then if you have this kind of panpsychism and this idea of a universal self or consciousness, then where we're headed for with what you were saying about the guy who doesn't believe in electricity but is heading for the electric chair, that electric chair is the tipping point where we tip from eusociality into a superorganism. So it's kind of like the singularity of the rapture of the nerds and stuff like that. So the current thinking of all these guys in the one world order and all of this is their vision of the superorganism is this transhuman, half electronic, very controlled superorganism. But it's basically the one world becomes a meta hive and a meta organism, and so we lose our individual selves and that little self, and it merges in this big global self, and that's where they're headed. They're headed for. The resistance that they face is that we're individualists and we're egotists, and they kind of made us that way deliberately to control us. But that electric chair is the loss of our own ego and our own self, and the recognition that we are all one species in one world. So they're kind of on the same track. They appear to be different factions that are at loggerheads. Say, for instance, communism. Communism essentially is the same deal. It's as they're saying we will get to this one world order where we're all equal, and we are, in essence, you can cut to the chase in Marx and say we'll emerge as a superorganism in the parlance of the 21st century. From a number of directions, people are coming to this idea that we reach the rapture. It's the death of our individual selves and the emergence of this meta-organism. So what do you take about that theory?
There's a lot to it. We don't know, as you carve out ecological niche after ecological niche to head for, well, that's the ever-increasing complexity component. We already are, I would argue, in that meta organism state when you look at just how interconnected everything is. The question is, how much further do you want to take it? How much do you subsume yourself to the machine? And this is, the discussion really the last week that I've been having is that, well, right now you still have a choice. You have a choice whether you want to proceed with the technological approach to doing things, or you want to work with nature more. And nature brought us to the point of self-actualization, the emergence of consciousness that we have tried to carry across generations using vehicles like religion. Or are you prepared to subsume all of that to with technology, and what's involved in that loss? Okay, and we live in highly curated environments already. Is it going to be that much different? I don't know. But I see my children already having less childhood than I do right now, because they're always on computers. There's no children for them to play with, and there's no me just taking them out to play. Like, we were playing football yesterday, but me going out to play with them is not real play like children as I remember it. But in from another perspective, though, they're using computers at a very advanced level and have understood the principles of networking and servers and rapid communication and actions, mental action emerging in some form of well, it's a digital reality in this sense.
Yeah, but they understand the user interface, the digital interface.
Yeah.
They've lost the organic interface, and they're thinking more in terms of a digital interface. So their interaction with the meta-organism is digital, and it's done by programmers who define a user interface. But the organic user interface, which is our face, we have less and less. Our face and our voice and stuff. People are using text instead of using face and voice, because really text is more digital, and it's using Broca's area and Wernicke's area, which is really at stake here. And so we're losing all the rest of the nuance of our brains. We're losing the pheromones and smell and the normal interactions that you would have, a whole brain experience. So my feeling is that we're heading for utter disaster. And that these guys in the tech future, the digital idea is completely terminal. They will make us go extinct. And I have mathematical proof, because you mentioned the papers in the 30s. And coming back to what you're saying about the East, understanding more fuzzy logic and the acceptance of complexity, or really just fuzzy data, which the West hates. Everything's got to be absolutist and defined, and that's going to kill us. So coming back to why those papers in the 30s, it was actually proved by Western logic and Western methods in Gödel and Turing's papers that the limits to logic. And we ignored it because it utterly undid our civilization. It was a huge threat. The ironic spin-off from Turing's paper was the computer, was the Turing machine. And so your daughter's interfacing with a Turing machine. But that program that Turing and Gödel proved that was absolutely impossible, mainly because of self-reference. They proved with mathematical certainty that you cannot have this absolutist society that we're trying to get in the West. So they proved the end of rationalism, and we just saw it, blinked, and carried on as regardless of it. But that was called the Hilbert program. Hilbert was on the program exactly where Klaus Schwab and these cyberneticists and the futurologists and the transhumanists, they all inherit from Hilbert. And Hilbert, in about 1900, he said, like, let's put everything on a digital, rational logic. They were logicians. They said, we can get past all these politicians, and they didn't like the fact that there was uncertainty in the law, that it was capricious and arbitrary, and judges were fallible, and people were human. And they said, let's get rid of all this human stuff, make it deterministic, perfectly. First strong death technique, it'll be like a BMW factory, everything will run like clockwork.
Introducing the denial of death.
It isn't a denial. Ultimately, where they're going is if we have everything rational pinned down, we will control death. Death is decay, disorder, that kind of degeneracy is it's entropy. We will get entropy out of the picture, is what they're saying, including disease. Because disease, I mean, if you really look at diseases, all they are is genetic entropy. I mean, SARS-CoV-2 is just a bit of entropy. So, but
I'm not. Is that the right language to be using?
Maybe, but maybe it's not.
You can step out and just say it's making things. It's a catalyst for making things even more complex. So the entropy.
Well, this is the other side of it. So other people like Cantor and these guys, they saw that aspect. Is that although it was the end of Western civilization, Turing and Gödel's papers marks the end of our civilization. At that point, we hit a cul-de-sac. Everybody ignored it and carried on like the guy heading towards the electric chair, not believing in electricity. We carried on, you know, believing in logic and rationalism, even though rationalism was proved to be illegitimate according to its own.
It has a limit. It's a boundary.
What they showed was that it's either inconsistent or incomplete, which is, so to be absolutist, you have to say it's complete and it's consistent. And you say they proved mathematically you cannot have that. And mainly because of self-reference. At some point, you're going to have self-reference. As soon as you have self-reference, you bug it. So what other people, mathematicians, have come and they say, well, we can. They called it the pathology. They said that he's introduced a pathology into mathematics, which was so pure and was going to save us all. And then they came recently, you still get papers, these stupid idiots come up with papers saying, well, we can make sure that a system is not self-referential. And you say, how? You'll never, if you don't understand what Gödel was saying, if you think there's a path to making sure that you can, it's like having self-healing software and all this crap. They basically don't understand thermodynamics, information theory and stuff. It's just a complete rookie mistake. But they get papers like this published in peer-reviewed journals just out of desperation, really, that people don't want to give up on logic and rationalism.
Well, but at the end, it's a powerful tool, right? And the way
powerful,
forward
it's deadly. It's a drug.
Yeah, so you combine it with a more sort of Eastern viewpoint, right? That you accept that there's some things that we try to keep more holistic rather than reductive, to keep breaking systems ever down to constituent parts and building them back. There's and this is, so you asked me at the beginning, so why believe in God? Why have a spiritual component in life? Well, because of that very factor, that I want. It's imperative for survival to have that ambiguity and almost to nurture it. And that ambiguity is the spiritual side of man. Okay, that no matter how much we tease apart the brain, the neurons, the biochemistry, whatever networks that you want to look at, from genetic to anatomical, there's an element to the human experience which is ineffable, if you like, and it's something that's worth preserving, like it's worth preserving wolves, right? Because you may as well, like, that's the point I was making at the beginning, you may as well just have better memory, better muscles, better physical attributes than putting all that mental energy into the existential side of your existence. And whether people agree or not, everyone is always thinking about themselves and their relation to themselves, to their peers and their environment, right? And that can get it can get subverted in lots of ways. And you're always seeing people try to use and abuse it. Better to better to learn from the wisdom of the elders somewhat than the brash impetuousness of the technology, the kids that are playing with the technology coming through. That's where we're at the cusp of doing that.
So I'm completely sold. You convinced me. But can I leave you with this thought? So in Greece, and you talk about going back to the ancients and stuff, you can not do better than go back to ancient Greece. So one of the things we lost in the West, and I try and introduce this to people, but with mixed success, is that because we're so absolutist in the West, we've deluded ourselves into thinking that there's one form of time, and that's chronological time. It's chronos. In ancient Greece, they said there were two types of time. It's chronos and kairos. So kairos is mentioned in the Bible more often, actually, than chronos. So chronological time is what you're talking about. Your daughter is on a computer, is working with a clock, with a chronological clock. The difference between play that we had when we were kids is that's kairos time. It's more like opportunity, it's propitiity, it's synchronicity. It's just happenstance. So what I think as we evolve, and what we're talking about, it's better to evolve naturally as opposed to this artificiality, this ideology that they're putting in, and technology that they're putting, over this narrative. Is that's a chronological narrative. What we're talking about is evolving naturally, is evolving according to kairos, the rules of kairos and fluidity and natural evolution. So yeah, so that's the thing I try to let people understand, is we've lost one form of time, and rediscovering that time, it's very much like stop and smell the roses kind of stuff, and but we've lost the clear view that it's still in Greece, in modern Greece now. People know what kairos and chronos is. It's a deficit that we have, particularly in the English-speaking world. But I just wanted to leave you with that as a little thought and views. But otherwise, I'm completely in alignment with you. It's very frustrating. I'll find some disagreement at some stage.
Like I say, we don't. Time is a very difficult thing for us to pin down in the neurosciences. We can see factors that have clock-like activity.
I just had the thought that the apocalypse, in terms of Revelation and the book of Revelation and apocalyptic, that apocalypse is kairos. So that is it's quite easy to interpret it as the emergence of the meta self, basically the superorganism, where we lose our individuality and become a superorganism. Just function. It's kind of like a phase change. So you can have so much complexity, but then eventually complexity dissolves itself into simplicity again. It's kind of like if you get Byzantium enough, it kind of tips over. The system tips over into a phase change where it looks like simplicity all over again. But anyway, I think that's a good place to stop. It looks like you obviously need to go. So kairos is on your ass.
Yeah, unfortunately at the moment, and
I mean the chronos is in your ass. Kairos.
They're both. I thought the child coming in was
that's kairos.
Yeah, the chronos as well is on my ass as well this week.
All ticking away. Well, okay, it was fabulous to talk to you. Let's do it again.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Really
more than welcome.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you for recording.
And staying up so late.
Enjoy the day. Thanks so much. Lovely way to start the day.
Thank you, guys.
Great.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Bye, everyone.
Bye.